the reality is this is an existential threat to our nation. In 2017, we were affected by a hurricane, which caused damage totaling 226% of our GDP.
Wow.
85% of our national debt is in response to natural disasters. So it is truly an existential threat. It's a national imperative. And clearly, we are at the front line of this global war. A war which we did not start, but a war that we have to respond to. And the reality is the developed world they do express empathy, but empathy is not enough.
Yeah.
What we need is practical action, fulfillment of pledged commitments. And until this is done, then we are on our own. And so essentially, we in the Caribbean are on our own in respect to building resilience against natural disasters and building mitigation against natural disasters and underwriting the full extent of the damage caused by these natural disasters. And this happens to us every single day in the Caribbean. And so for us, it is a major preoccupation. It is not allowing us to develop our economy to the extent that we should, because the resources that we are spending is to replace lost and damaged infrastructure. So you build today, tomorrow you're affected by a natural disaster. You have to go either on the global market, financial market, to borrow, or if you happen to have some savings, which is not always readily available, you have to paddle your own canoe.
I'm just going to repeat that. 85% of your budget goes to disaster relief. Let that sink in for a minute. Your Excellency, Manele, Solomon Islands, 900, I think probably some of the most beautiful islands in the world. About 140 or so are inhabited. You are facing a very similar scenario to what we're seeing in Dominica. Tell us what you're facing right now, how much you have to spend on relief.
Thank you. Before I respond to that, let me also, at the outset, thank the government and people of the United Arab Emirates for the invitation to join this important forum, and of course for the warm hospitality that has been extended. It's a pleasure to be on this session this morning. Yes, as my colleague has alluded to, we face very similar challenges in terms of climate change. Of course, climate change and sea level rise is the single greatest threat facing small island developing states, including those in the Pacific, where Solomon Islands is. We are in the Southwest Pacific, and we are vulnerable, we are predisposed to hydrometeorological as well as geological hazards. And on top of that, we are small economies, so we don't have the capacity and the capability to respond whenever we have disasters. And as we can appreciate, these disasters are either nature-induced or man-made induced in terms of climate change and sea level rise. And I think the challenge here is one of preparedness, responsiveness. Sometimes we forget the end part of it, which is the recovery part of the process. Climate change is already happening. It's already a disaster. It's a crisis. It's something that is happening. It's affecting our communities. And it is a very expensive exercise for us to keep on rebuilding every year whenever you have cyclones. And I think it's important to note as well the increasing frequency and magnitude of climate-related events, natural disasters, cyclones, hurricanes, or even earthquakes. Increasing not only in terms of frequency, but also in terms of magnitude. And that is the destruction that they can cause. They can undo decades of development efforts that small countries like us spent. So it takes time for us to recover. While we are still recovering, then another one hits. So it is a ongoing
It's a
challenge.
vicious cycle, a vicious cycle. And to the point Prime Minister Skerrit said, we don't need empathy, we need more than that. It reminds me of the thoughts and prayers line. We don't need thoughts and prayers, we need funding. And frankly, you know, despite the commitments in Paris and despite the money that's been put on the table, it is not being invested. And I wonder what is going on. You know, and I ask my African counterparts, and they say, well, the answer is, well, we don't have enough bankable projects. Is that the feedback you're getting?
Well, certainly in our case in Dominica, we do have a national strategy. We do have a national plan on resilience. We do have bankable projects. This has been endorsed by the World Bank independently. The reality is commitments are being made at the Conference of the Parties, commitments made in the Paris Accord, commitments made about 18 years ago in Copenhagen. And the reality is those commitments are not being materialized. And so what I believe we need to have in the world today is a political engagement, a transparent and honest political engagement, so that the developed world can tell us what is feasible, what is doable on their part.
And I'm sorry, because we don't have a lot of time, but I have to ask you, why do you think that those commitments have not been kept? Why? Is it, you know, what is the reason that we're still having this conversation so many years on?
I think countries are having their own political issues. Some countries have political issues. There's a political divide in countries in respect to what they view as development assistance. I think unless you take this to a rules-based arrangement, like what obtains within the WTO, where it is a legal obligation. If you leave it up to countries to decide how much they give, when they give, how they give, who they give, you're not going to achieve the desired objective. So it has to be an obligation. And once it becomes an obligation, then you can hold people to account. As it is now, you can't hold any one of these countries to account.
And we keep having the same conversations. Yeah. Prime Minister Manele, during the first Trump presidency, the United States got itself out of the Paris Accord, this time around again. And I wonder what you feel the impact is going to be, whether it's going to set the whole world back in terms of commitments to fighting climate change. Because it's always said, if the US is not in the game, then it perhaps gives an excuse to other countries to say, well, we don't have to focus on this as much and as aggressively.
What it means for us, small island developing states, is that we need to step up with our collaboration and partnership. Or in other words, we expect our other partners to step up in terms of the collaboration and partnerships that we need as countries to address the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. As my colleague has said earlier, this is a phenomenon that is not of our own making, but we face the brunt of the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. So we hope that the international community can step up in terms of the means of implementation, for example, the financing and the transfer of technology that will enable countries like us to address the impacts of climate change. As I've said, while preparedness and response is critical, usually after a disaster happens, the recovery part of it is where the challenge is also, because they will be rebuilding, and that requires support.
So you're here in the UAE, you're both here having conversations. What conversations are you having? What are you looking for? What are investors asking you?
We are keen to explore collaboration in terms of climate change. I think there are two approaches, as you know, both in terms of mitigation, but also in terms of adaptation. I think for small countries like us, both adaptation and mitigation. Mitigation in terms of renewable energy programs and projects, for example. As you would appreciate, a good number of the Sustainable Development Goals and targets will require communities, especially rural communities in many small island developing states or least developed countries, to have access to reliable and affordable energy. So that is critical. Yeah. But also adaptation in terms of enhancing the capacity of our atoll communities to be able to withstand sea level rise, coastal erosion. So there are adaptation measures that are also critical.
Yeah. Okay, Prime Minister Skerrit, I want you to jump in here.
Sure.
This.
I mean, despite the fact that we are facing a huge challenge where climate change is concerned, the Caribbean is one of the most attractive parts of the world. So there are huge opportunities for private sector investments, development of seaports and airports, investments in tourism, investments in energy projects, renewable energy projects, investments in real estate, investment in agriculture. The Caribbean is a very safe part of the world. There's political stability in the Caribbean. We are rules-based, and we have constitutions that are guarded jealously. And so for an investor, the Caribbean is a very safe place to invest with huge opportunities, notwithstanding our vulnerabilities where climate change is concerned. And so we would like to offer this to the world as opportunities for both public and private sector investments in the Caribbean.
And I can say from personal experience, I've been to the Caribbean, but to Nassau, not to Dominica, and it's absolutely phenomenally beautiful. I mean, it's one of the most amazing places. Solomon Islands is still on my list. I have to do that one, Prime Minister. I want to talk about USAID, because both of your countries have been assisted in some way or other, whether it's through capacity building, whether it's work on the ground. And the impact now that have you seen an impact, and what does that mean?
We have not seen an impact. In our case, they're not major investments via US aid. And the reality is, the US government has a right to do whatever it believes is in its interests. We're not a tax-paying person in the United States, and so we respect government's domestic policies. And if the United States believe that's a route you want to take, then that's a matter for it. And so we do not engage ourselves in criticizing governments and their domestic policies. We'll only criticize government if it's a decision affecting the rest of the world, like climate change and their position on climate change. But we respect the United States. That's a matter for the citizens of the United States to deal with. So we're not, the reality is, countries like ours, Solomon Islands, Dominica, and the Caribbean, we now have to look to emerging economies.
Yeah.
Emerging economies like United Arab Emirates that have demonstrated its commitment to development assistance, to working with governments across the world in building capacity, in investments in renewable energy, and the like, and healthcare and so forth. You have Saudi Arabia, you have China, you have India. So these are the countries that I believe we have to look to as small island developing states, and to ensure and assure ourselves of continued investments. But I do not think that we in the global south should preoccupy ourselves with what happens in the global north, because the truth is the global north, as the years go by, are showing less and less interest in assisting in countries like ours and also fulfilling the obligations and commitments. So we don't go in a dark room and cry. We engage friends, and this is why we're here, and this is why this global forum is this World Government Forum is so important, because it gives countries like ours a platform, a global platform, to express ourselves, to share our views, and to offer opportunities which exist in our countries.
And to your point, you need funding, you need private sector investment, you need investment in projects, and that's going to be absolutely vital. So let's take a step forward here and say, what do you ultimately need right now as we face this existential threat? Prime Minister Manele, what are you looking for at this juncture? And I think we need to drive home that the conversations we're going to see happening at COP need to be a lot more aggressive, and they need to result in some kind of action. Because, and I was speaking to the Seychelles president, and even speaking to government officials from the Maldives, and they said something really significant, that if small island nations do not get the help they need through financing, then we're talking about a refugee crisis at some point, and that will happen.
2 points here. The first one, let me go back to the issue of preparedness and responsiveness.
Yeah.
It is important that to understand that how well prepared countries are and how they respond to any disaster is intricately linked to the development challenges they are facing. And of course, each country, although we may share similar development challenges, but the context is important. So the development challenges that each country, including Somaliland, face, that determines how well prepared we are in terms of addressing climate change challenges. For us, it means we have to ensure as a government, to ensure that there is connectivity in terms of communication, there is improvements in infrastructure, but not only economic infrastructure, but also social infrastructure in terms of raising health and education levels. I believe these, at the end of the day, help us to be better prepared in terms of facing the impacts of disasters. Secondly, looking for opportunities in terms of greater collaboration and partnership with a good number of countries. For us, as an LDC that is preparing to graduate, come 2027, we would like to use trade and investment as strategies to prepare us for graduation, but also to sustain us after graduation. So trade and investment will be critical for us going forward.
Let's quickly talk about the Loss and Damage Fund. It's something that was, thrown around, and as you say, we're dealing with something that we didn't create. Very quickly, do you believe in it? Do you think you'll?
I believe what happens leading up to COP, the Conference of the Parties Summit, is that the developed countries go around the developing world and to get a sense of what people are talking about. And then at the COP, they make a commitment. But knowing that the moment they jump on their private jets to go back to their respective capitals, then we are forgotten. And I come back to the point, unless there is an obligation on the part of the developed world to own up to its responsibility, we will keep going in circles. And we do not have time. Time has passed. I mean, countries are being decimated. Countries are we're seeing an increase in poverty, unemployment, because of the impact of climate change on the fiscal space of countries. And so what developing countries need more than ever now is access to financing.
Do you believe that we should wean ourselves off fossil fuels?
I don't think.
Is that realistic? And I say this, and I know I'm saying it in an oil-producing region. By
I don't think we need to cause any country to abandon what is bringing in revenues to it. I believe that if developing countries can be provided with the resources to build in adaptation, to build in resilience, and to provide us with financing for loss and damage, then I think we can mitigate the situation. But to tell someone to stop drilling for fossil fuel now, it's not practical. It's not sensible.
Yeah.
And this is coming from a country that has been impacted dramatically by climate change. But we have to be pragmatic and sensible.
Absolutely.
If we're to achieve our desired objective of one, developing country recognizing their recognizing their responsibility, and more importantly, fulfilling their obligation.
Prime Minister Manele, I'd like to give you the last word. In the current state of things, in the current play of things, are you feeling optimistic? Do you think that funding is going to increase? Or do you think it's going to be the same snail's pace that we've been seeing, that you've been experiencing for such a long time?
I am optimistic. I believe that there is space and scope for us to forge close international collaboration. And I believe such forums like this does provide that space for us to explore and strengthen international collaboration to address the challenges, including climate change and sea level rise that we are all facing.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. An honor to have you with us today. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.